Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Too. Tonight we have a very interesting, will I say the least, show where we're going to be doing a series of shows, and we're going to diagnose, explain, talk about two things. I have a intro I'm going to play. Plus, I got to give a shout out to my boy. Sent us some music, so I know a lot of people had been hoping that we had been gonna be here. Peace, Rodney. What's going on? We had every intention on doing a show on Tuesday, as you guys know. No, I did a show with Mutai, and about 15 minutes into the show, I had an emergency. I had a family emergency. But wasn't nothing, everything is good. But I appreciate you guys for joining us. We're gonna definitely try to get back to our regular program, and there's been a lot of things going on. Sister Azima should be, if not next Tuesday, the following Tuesday. Me and Sister Azima are going to pick up. Me and the brothers for Pat Talk. It's been, like I said, there's been a lot going on. So we're going to be picking it back up with Pat Talk very soon. It's been, and if you guys live in the Northeast, you guys know it's been a very interesting month in the Northeast when it comes to the weather. It's been brutally cold. It hasn't been this cold in years. Actually, probably the second week of October. It's been cold. So with that, I'm gonna play something to get us started, and then we're gonna go for here. Sister Star, what's going on? And then we'll get started and go from there. America did not stumble into black inequality. It engineered it. To Jim Crow, from redlining to mass incarceration. This nation created a racial hierarchy, law, policy, and violence, and then spent generations pretending consequences were accidental. By the mid 1960s, the damage was undeniably legal segregation was collapsing under civil rights pressure, but inequality remained stubborn and visible. Black poverty, urban decay, family stress, unemployment, and unrest could no longer be ignored. So America did what it always does. When reality becomes uncomfortable, it commissions reports. Over the next few weeks, we'll be discussing the Moynihan Report in 1965 and the Kerner Report in 1968. Both were official, both were federal, both attempted to explain the condition of Black America. But they told two very different stories, and those differences still shape how America talks about race today. The Moynihan Report, officially titled The Negro Family, The Case of National Action, was written by Daniel Patrick Moynihan while he served in the United States Department of Labor. Its historical context matters. The report came after slavery, after Reconstruction, betrayal after Jim Crow, after decades of racial terror, housing exclusion, job discrimination, and political disenfranchisement. Black Americans have been systematically denied wealth, stability, and protection, often by law. Moynihan acknowledged that history, but he framed it as past damage, not an active system. His focus was the present social condition of Black families. The strength of the Moynihan Report is that it did not deny social reality. It looked directly at instability in inside communities, unemployment, family stress, generational poverty, said these conditions mattered. That was not wrong. Moynihan understood that policy failure does not stay abstract. It shows up in households. It affects relationships. It shapes childhood outcomes. It influences long-term mobility. He argued that centuries of racial oppression had weakened the economic position of Black men, stabilized family roles, and created a feedback loop where poverty reproduced itself socially. not just economic. That insight, that social conditions mediate policy outcomes, was important. But the fatal weakness of the Moynihan Report was emphasis in framing. By centering family structure as the primary obstacle, Moynihan shifted attention away from the systems that produce family instability in the first place. His language, especially the phrase tangle of pathology, turned survival strategies into supposed effects. What began as a structural observation became a cultural diagnosis. And once that happened, America stopped asking what segregation, redlining, and exclusion had done, and started asking what Black families were doing wrong, shifting the weight on Black families. The report unintentionally or intentionally gave political cover to the narratives of personal responsibility, moral failure, and cultural differences. It allowed policymakers to reduce centuries of state violence into the household behavior. In short, Moynihan explained effects with sufficient attention to ongoing causes. 3 years later, the Kerner Report offered a radical different diagnosis. The Kerner Commission was formed in response to the urban uprisings across the country. Cities were being burned, not because Black Americans were irrational, but because the conditions were unbearable. The Kerner Report opened with one of the most honest sentences ever produced by the U.S. government. Our nation is moving towards two societies, one Black, one white, separate but equal. This was not psychology. This was an indictment. The strength of the Kerner Report was clarity. It named white racism, not abstract prejudice, but policy-driven racism as the central cause of inequality. It identified housing segregation, employment discrimination, police brutality, educational neglect, and media distortion as interlocking systems. Kerner understood that ghettos were not accidental, they were designed. Redlining was federal policy. Segregation was enforced by law. Unemployment was engineered through exclusion. Police policy was systemic, not random. Kerner made something very clear. Unrest was not the problem, it was the symptom. But the weakness in the Kerner Report was political naivety. Kerner demanded massive federal investment, integration, restructuring without fully grappling with America's refusal to pay that price. The diagnosis was accurate, but the perception threatened power. Kerner understood the depth of resistance to racial justice when it required redistribution, integration, and accountability. So the report was praised, but then ignored. Together, these reports reveal America's core dilemma. Moynihan located the crisis in people. Kerner located the crisis in power. Moynihan emphasized behavior shaped by history. Kerner emphasized history enforced by policy. America chose the narrative that required the least change. Fixing families is cheaper than fixing systems. Blaming cultural costs nothing. Dismantling segregation costs trillions. So America embraced Moynihan's framing and buried Kerner's demands. That choice was not accidental, it was strategic. The result was that what later became known as benign neglect, the quiet decision to abandon Black communities while moralizing about their condition. And here is the truth that links both reports. Systems create constraints. Constraints shape behavior. Behavior is then used to justify systems. Slavery destabilized families. Jim Crow criminalized mobility. Redlining trapped communities. Mass incarceration moved fathers. Then America asks why families were unstable. That is not confusion, that is design. The Moynihan Report helps us understand how damage shows up socially. The Kerner Report helps us understand who caused the damage. One without the other is incomplete. And America's greatest failure in all this is choosing exploitation over accountability. So the next few weeks, we will discuss in detail these two reports and how these two reports continually affect the Black community.
They say time is a healer, a slow moving stream, but some losses run deeper than hope can redeem. So I sit by these waters till my soul understands that some
Maybe people are so different happy with our music.
in the palm of your hand. This river of my tears, it flows through the night, washing the pain with the pale morning light. It carries the sorrow, it carries the years. Oh, this river. Reverse.
It's PGZ out of Jersey, nigga. Tell them add the gratuity, cause I'm serving niggas. They hear the pain in my voice, they know it's murder in it. That how we come with an engine, I was just swerving it. I'm outside on the south side. All that capping, you rapping to get your mouth wide. They was up 10 on me, nigga, but now they down 5. Never turning up with no money, cause you the downside. I'm the difference and they talking about it. I put the words in the actions and you just talking about it. I got 100 on a nigga rhyming. The flow cold, the Mac hoes like Frankie Lyman. The watch bezel is all diamonds, perfect timing. Used to dig Megan Thee Stallion, that was before the line. What they selling, tell them we ain't buying. Yeah, I'm all about peace, but my peace is iron. Haters had me feeling like David when he faced Goliath. Wanna go to war with the devil, I'm a deep fry. North Jersey, I'm the new Messiah. Yeah, I heard your man live, but he weird, why? Get it? Live, but he weird, why? Daddy get him packed in the trunk like a spare tire. Got me in the booth smoking gas, about to start a fire. Had to double back for the bag, I'm the multiplier. I'm just trying to reach my destiny. Yeah, my brother Chef Rad shared the recipe. I was riding through the Bay, not Chesapeake. East Coast nigga out west, hammer next. Listen to my bars, read my thoughts like telepathy. You really about the paper, not the capping, nigga message you. Half the city hate to see me shine, and it's the same type of shit that got Nipsey line.
Professor Drea.
I know I was on mute. Peace, everyone.
What's going on?
Nothing much. Finally warming up down here.
Well, I wanted to give us, that's a friend of mine that rap. Wanted to give us a little different vibe. Maybe get us a little amped up. Sometimes people hear hip hop and they get a little spark going, right?
Yeah.
But as you know, I did it in the opening, discussing the Moynihan and the Kerner Report, which is very interesting. When you look at the contrast of both of these reports and how both of these reports were perceived, we understand that the Moynihan Report basically blamed Black people for the condition they were in, which a lot of civil rights leaders at the time pushed back because it basically did not talk about the issues of what was being going on as far as, the effects of chattel slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and really the beginning of them destroying the communities by taking the father out of the homes of welfare and so forth and so on, and then unemployment and stuff like that. But and then 3 years later, during when the uprisings, Blacks started pushing back and burning shit up and cutting up. they weren't the only ones, but it was a lot of stuff going on, Vietnam, so forth. In the Kerner Report, and said, well, tried to address the condition, and it talked about the symptoms. I mean, not the symptoms, the core issues. But when we look at it and then fast forward it 50, 60 years later, 60 years later, some things changed, and we'll get to that in the course of what we're going to discuss in the next couple of weeks. And hopefully our audience and people in the chat really, really um, themselves do some research on this and really give their input and have this discussion, because one of the things that we need to look at when we talk about the 60s is it was a pivotal period. You had the likes of Colin Powell, you had the likes of A. Philip Randolph, you had all these influential black leaders, and the youngest one, they used King and John Lewis, who was a kid at the time, but they used King as the face. And a lot of things fell off track in the direction that it was going. A lot of things, as far as like getting the Civil Rights Bill signed, um, how it was framed, the wording in the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, so forth, so on. And King has said the one of the most famous speeches he ever gave was, "I think I took my people into a burning house." And a lot of people have tried to figure out what King meant by that. And sometimes when we look at our boomers, we're very critical in it, of them being weak or them being soft. And, we're looking at them through a different lens 60 years later, and what did they accomplish and where we are now. And it's very important to try to really, you can understand the climate from word of mouth through history, but sometimes acts, bills, reports, they serve a purpose, good, bad, or indifferent, and what it does and how it gets people off track. Even some of the people that was around during that time that was influential in the movement, they will tell you that the movement was never supposed to go in the direction it was supposed to go. This movement, we can continuously say the civil rights movement is what got a lot of the people in masses to go to a political party. And a lot of people say that the parties switched, but in actuality, the parties never switched. They never switched. This stuff that happened in the 60s might have switched the framing of the parties, and people might have thought that the parties changed because of what happened during the 60s and who signed the bill. But when you start to pull back the layers of what was going on, the parties never changed. And this has been a false narrative that has really made us today suffer the consequences. Because when you look at black liberation should never be tied to a political party. It should be tied to black liberation equals black liberation. If you choose to use a political party or a political means or voting means to get to black liberation, that's a means to get there. That's not the end all be all. So with that, what's going on?
What's up, Q? What's up, everyone? When I was doing my research, I had to take a deep breath because I did not learn any of this stuff while I was studying to become a social worker. And I took plenty of sociology classes, social work classes, and just other history classes. And have not ran across this. And it's funny because as a social worker, you learn about people and you learn about systems. And both these reports talk about the system and also the people in the system, and that's the infrastructure of social work is the person in the environment and the person in the system. So I thought it was quite interesting, and especially during, like you mentioned, the time frame of what was going on in this generation as far as with Vietnam War, assassination, civil rights. Um, and it's interesting when we talk about the civil rights is look at the wording. The wording didn't specifically say black rights. It was civil. And, whenever we think about civil, we think about job placements like civil service. You need to act civilized. We need to civilize society. So, it's very interesting. I'm a words person, and you think about the words and the terms. It really wasn't, hey, this is black identified. It was like for all people. So whether you're, you know, a person of color, um, dealing with also two people who are disabled, dealing with people who may have a disability. So that was an inclusive language, right? In which we kind of see them being ripped away now. Um, the Kerner report, I side with that one because we always like to think, oh, people are the problem. We understand people are the problem, but also too, we got to look at the policies in which that's being placed onto people. A lot of people don't understand about different policies because a lot of policies that we do have was written back in like early, 1900s when I'm thinking about, Social Security or different acts. It was pretty much like FDR, started a lot of these policies, in which, let's say our elders are getting Social Security, whatever the case is. A lot of these policies are antiquated. I don't think they'd be revisited. And a lot of times when we think about policies, black folks are on the other side of the punitive or, the face of, welfare or the face of different broken infrastructure. And every time when I think about going back to the reports and how, the fathers was taken out the home, we got to think it was like Vietnam War. A lot of our, let's say, ancestors or even our people now who fought in the Vietnam War came back with mental health disorders, came back unhoused, came back and not being able to once again not get their benefits. So it's just, I know we're going to unpack a lot, when it comes to these reports, but I just don't think we as people understand that these reports even exist. We may hear about it, but I don't think that we have taken the time to unpack it and how these reports have really, I would say, like dimmed our light or just even suppressed, you know, us moving forward as a society, as people. Yes, we move forward as on Black labor, like our labor is being used in certain areas in the society. But as our family structure, as a structure, the system of just culture wise, it's just pretty much I don't want to say dismantled, but it's fragmented, if that makes sense.
One of the issues when we discuss it in the chat, hopefully you guys are in tune to what we're talking about. I know quite a few of you are, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that one of the issues in a lot of these reports, for example, back then you had these two reports, Moynihan and the Kerner Report. The Negro Act or Negro Project, whatever the Moynihan official title was, which is crazy within itself. Even when you look at the Civil Rights and the Voters' Right Act, uh, we know that a lot of people were upset with what the Supreme Court said and what, in particular, Clarence Thomas said, Justice Clarence Thomas. And I'm of the opinion that Justice Clarence Thomas actually did Black America a favor in his dissenting opinion. If you look at the wording in his dissenting opinion, we will understand that he said that these provisions and these triggers should not be based on blanket blackness. Because when you have a blanket blackness and bring everybody up to speed, this is where we're at now. Some of the initiatives, the acts and rules that was supposed to have been implemented in the 60s, that was supposed to target Black Americans. What happened is because of the influx of immigration from the Hart-Celler Act, it became a blanket blackness. Instead of, because you decided to have these other acts that was basically undermining the Civil Rights Act. It was undermining it the whole time because now you're having this blanket. You're allowing white women to be considered a double minority. And this is why white women historically have always been the benefits of affirmative action and DEI policies, even though this stuff was not intended for them because of the wording. The wording came into minorities. It was not specific language that said Black Americans, descendants of chattel slavery, descendants of Jim Crow, descendants of redlining, descendants of housing discrimination. It just may have said black. It didn't even say black. It just said minority. The wording, the wording is how a lot of Black Americans and their descendants got basically phased out, and these things were not specifically for them. And then, like I said, the Hart-Celler Act that just really wiped it out because it opened up. America shifted when they decided to do the Civil Rights Act. The Hart-Celler Act came right during his heels, and it shifted and it opened up the floodgates for what we dealing with now in the present immigration issue. So let me ask you before we go too far into our conversation, what was your view when you first started to unpack what anybody from the New York area that's a little older than me will know who Moynihan is? Moynihan was a very interesting character. Very, very, very interesting man. Him and his family. But anyway, what was your thoughts when you first started understanding the Moynihan Report? That's what they try to say what it is.
Um, when I thought about it, I looked at it as more of from like the Jim Crow lens. And like you have mentioned, he's an interesting person. And you would think someone had wrote this report is from the South, right? Because of just the staunch racism, the systemic racism. But this person was from New York, like this progressive, modern city that was on the map in which what a lot of immigrants came through, New York, Ellis Island. And so when I read the report, it was just like, oh my God, this is fast forward to 2026. We are seeing the manifestation of that, of, the family structure, like I mentioned, is very fragmented. When we think about poverty, a lot of our people are still living below the poverty level, even food insecurity level, even educational level, because there's still millions of people who read, at a certain grade level. Because I know a lot of times when I think about education, you have to really tailor your curriculum based off of sometimes like a seventh grade reading level, and these people are getting their master's degrees and who will be in charge of certain policies and certain organizations, right? So when I read his report, I was like, wow, this is really suppressing people and holding people back, and hence why the movement of the northern migration, or the movement of hey, living in subsidized housing that is underfunded, and that also too that is still segregated, right? Because a lot of people don't know subsidized housing wasn't meant for us. It was meant for white folks who was coming back from the war so they can, get established so they can go and create suburbs. So that's why you have suburbs created based off of pretty much the report of, being redlined and how certain black folks can even live um, in those suburbs or even just in the HOAs and just even in certain housing, right? And just looking at black communities as dysfunctional. And we can go back to or even ask your elders in your family. One point in time we was very a community, like in which you did not have to go probably participate in the northern migration because we all live within, our own, I would say like compound, especially if your family's from the south. But now we see, like I said, the manifestation of the dysfunction of, being locked out of, let's say, jobs, education opportunities, because of, like you mentioned, that double minority. And a lot of times we're not even part of that protective class of the double minority, despite me being a black woman. It's still what they're still gonna see my skin color as a black, as a black woman. I can't hide that. And a lot of times you can be overqualified for the position and you still won't get the position. So, I've looked at that. Also, too, this is a big one for me that I wrote down in my notes. Mass incarceration. Pretty much when you look at this report, how a lot of, the pipeline to prison was kind of like this was like setting a tone for that, and how we see so many millions of our brothers that is being incarcerated over punitive things. Um, this is also talking about more of when they get incarcerated and co-rehabilitated and coming out, transitioning out, you still got to pay a price, a restitution. Now, if you are a felon or whatever the case is, it's already tough enough. The job market is already tough enough for everyone. Then, when you black and you got those stripes on your back, how are you going to get a job to pay the institution, right? Or the restitution? I would say institution and restitution. So when you look at the Moynihan Report, it's just this vicious cycle of, I would say, abuse, of violence, of lack of resources. Of course, you're going to have what a broken community when no one is not breaking the cycle, or it makes it very hard for others to break the cycle. And it's like you stuck in this vicious cycle of, okay, rinse, wash, and repeat. So what's the sense of trying to be on a straight and narrow path when being a black person is being considered a crime based off of this report? And then here go people being locked out of basic necessities of a job, of housing, of food. And those are basic necessities that should be universal in healthcare as well.
So let me ask you one of the key phrases in the Moynihan Report, and I need you to put on your uh, your professor hat right now. As a someone from the academia field, someone from somebody who specializes, understands wording, understands the sociology of what's going on, tries to understand the psyche of a group of people. One of the key phrases that he used was a tangle of pathology. So if you were reading this and I'm quite sure you did, and you saw that phrase that he said, a tangle of pathology, what would that phrase mean to somebody who doesn't know anything about what the condition of Black America is, and they're reading this report? What would that say to you?
What that would say to me is like, oh, those people are diseased. They are contaminated. Because when you think of pathology is pretty much like the study of like diseases, the study of something that's contaminated for those who are my science folks, right? Because any type of ology is the study of. So, hence why we hear, when people are immigrants who come here that may look like us, stay away from Black Americans. What does that sound like? They are diseased. They are contaminated. Once again, they are dysfunctional, right? And if you get close to them, like, let's say an apple that's rotten, you will be rotten as well. Even if you live in their neighborhoods, even though you may have a proximity to blackness, but you still need to stay away from them. So, is once again, when you look at the wording, and I want everyone to, sometimes like we quickly want to read something, but also to bust out your dictionary or underline that word or highlight that word and really look it up and look at the context and how it's used in the content, right? To say like, oh, pathology, that means like, okay, that person is diseased. Stay away. It's like that quarantine. And look at what happens now. We get used, our community get used as like we're just consumers only, and that we cannot be producers. Once upon a time, we was producing so many amazing things. Now, look who come and take ownership, or sell us just trash in our own community. Not even taking pride of our own community as well. As far as with just ownership or just cleaning around the community, it's like, oh, just go to the Black community. They don't care. They don't care what they eat. They don't care what they consume. They don't care who move in there, instead of just gatekeeping. So, when you think about that word pathology, it's very interesting, and especially when it's used towards people, to like a culture or a group of people to stay away. And even I was looking at
And make no mistake, he came from the labor sector. He's someone who was Department of Labor at the time. where when you look at the symptoms, once again, the symptoms of unemployment, the symptoms of, and you could use the correlation of unemployment to crime in this country has been highlighted over and over and over again. That if you want to change crime, you want to change any area, most people will look at jobs. That has always been part of what we consider the black agenda, jobs and opportunity. So by him saying the pathology, talking about, for example, if you look at the 60s, it really wasn't an influx of opioids in our cities. Towards the late 60s, early 70s, opioid epidemic boomed. So we talk about the structure and what happened, and like Drea explaining that this was like a template of criminalizing Black America for the condition that they had become, that what had become. Excuse me. And the brother Hoshimod always says something, and I think is very, very poignant to this conversation. Is he says nothing's wrong with Black people. Something happened to Black people. So when you look at the condition look at the men, for example, you take him out the household, the factory in that city, went out of business. He can't have it. He don't have a job no more. His uncles had jobs there. They were able to take care of his family. He's a younger man. He got two kids. Now he can't provide for his wife. She got two small kids. She's not working. She's a homemaker. She's looking at him like you're not producing. She's saying, I can go down to the welfare office, but you got to get out the house. So all of these factors factor into the condition. I know a lot of us will say, well, you responsible for you. Yes, you are responsible for you and what you can do. You want to change your condition, you have to change it. However, there are always systems and factors that play in to people making good decisions, good choices, bad decisions, bad choices. You can fiddle. And he also said the this is interesting what he said about the Black family. And I agree with him in this thing that we are the centerpiece. His report was so, it attacked us, but he knew that the way to destabilize who we are as a people is we destabilize the Black family. This is why the Black America's condition is the way it is. Because we caused this rift within the home uh, from systems that went on. And he actually said it was the bottleneck. Moynihan said some interesting words in the framing of this report. In the note, like I said, for this man to be coming from Department of Labor, uh, coming up with this is very interesting. Go ahead, Sister Dre.
Exactly. And it brings me back to Boogie Down Productions Criminal Minded, where you have mentioned about when the black man is removed from the home, or he feels like he doesn't have a place in the home because, okay, back in the day we had the factories. Folks moved to Detroit, they moved to Milwaukee, they moved to the Midwest, or this the Rust Belt because of those factories and the mills. And now, let's say around this time in the 60s, early 70s, those things are like taken away. And so now you have this transition of, I gotta do what I gotta do, and here goes the criminal minded. So once again, like the system can be set up for that. And another interesting thing I was looking at from my lens as a social worker, and also too as a professor, that was kind of interesting if you like align with the Moynihan Report. And it's interesting when I looked at how social work was even structured. It was structured for immigrants in Chicago. For those who may not know, if for those study social work, never thought about social work, it was pretty much for immigrants, European immigrants, and us as people of what? We're people of community. We don't know anything about being individualistic. We all about alchemists. How can we survive to thrive? We decided, hey, they are schooling us. These people just got here. We've been here for eons. So now we got to come up with our own systems. So social work, the foundation of it, is all about fixing the person. It's not about fixing the system. And I can tell y'all that from studying out of HBCU and studying out of PWI, it's all about how do we fix this person instead of the broken system, unless you was taught by amazing professors that say, no, the system is broken and we need to dismantle it. And it's interesting, a lot of things such what we see now with politics, respectability politics. If you wear a suit, if you wear your clothes like this, you're not going to you're upstanding Negro, right? You are upstanding. So you're not going to be like the contaminated, remember the pathology population, you are outstanding. But let's think about all the folks who were marching in the civil rights, all those ancestors and some of those that's still alive, they had suits on. Some of them may had, overalls on because of the industry of agriculture, right? That they was, in. That's what they wore. So, even with all that, Dr. King wearing the suit, um, Fred Shuttlesworth, he was a big civil rights advocate here in Alabama, especially in Birmingham. All these, ancestors who wore suits, who wore the dresses, they still was getting their head beat in. So, even when you are participating in this respectability politics and even how you wear your hair, even how you, what the people do, code switch, they still may get you up out of there. And when I'm saying get you up out of there, that means out of a job. Look how many Black women have been displaced out of a job from last year to now. Even with we know the problems with Black men, just being institutionalized as well. We're seeing just a shift even in the workplace and also too even in our communities because there's even communities that used to be once historically, Black. You can even see the shift in that as well. So, once again, when you look at the Moynihan Report, it's all about how can let's say Black people is tired of being the inferior or the contaminated people, how can we now be compliant? How can we now participate in respectability politics? So once again, I'm not like them. I'm not like the contaminated ones. Hence why we see people do what I call it the black flight. They black flight. They're fleeing their communities because once again, um, the policies are made for our communities to not be resources pulled in. So, hence why, like I said, the Kerner report talks about resources. It talks about, um, you know, resources being equitable. But once again, we still
When you
we see in that.
when you look at it, right, when you look at how these reports are so different. One talked about symptoms, one talked about the systems, one talked about the symptoms and the conditions, and the reality is that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed, and you start to really get to understand that, for lack of better words, the powers that be are masturbating to our demise. Black trauma is big business. Black pain is big business. It's big business for those that are policymakers, and it's big business on those that will continue to regurgitate the symptoms, exploiting Black America. We This is why we speak about grifters, people, poverty pimps in our community, because it's very simple. Is some of the issues could be dealt with head on if real policy, and we talked about that even 6 years ago when we saw the George Floyd, and everybody said, "Well, we need a bill that's going to be specifically talking about protecting Black people from state sanctioned violence," and it never happened. The George Floyd bill never happened. Whether people like how George Floyd was killed or how he was killed, and some people say this, some people say that, we still never got a bill that specifically protects Black people from state sanctioned violence. No anti Black American bill. It's been Asian bills because of the jab. stuff like that because of the pandemic. However, we still have not. Now, it's lynching laws on the books, but it's nothing specific. They even in that Emmett Till bill, it is the language is not
Mm-hmm.
specific. Um, So you see that these things were weaponized against us. Welfare was weaponized against the black family. It got framed as blackmail, irresponsibility. He in all his crap that he did, Moynihan, his wheelhouse, and this is important. His wheelhouse was labor. He could have addressed the condition with decreasing the unemployment numbers
Mm-hmm.
in Black America. For lack of better words, not saying that he was this great guy or bad guy, because we know what he was. He could have single handedly changed the condition of the black family for the better
Absolutely.
because he was a secretary of the Department of Labor. So if he would have just stuck on the unemployment numbers and got the president at the time to address the unemployment issue in the black communities, he could have, if that was his intent, to affect major change.
Right. Exactly. And I say that all the time. I don't get hyped up when people be like, oh, that's the first black governor, the first black mayor, because y'all really think after all these years and centuries that they are going to move the needle for us. And I don't get hyped up about that because once again, people who be in power positions, they have the power to do things, but you see that we are always stuck at the bottom, even though they may be the person in the power position. There's still no policies like you have mentioned that specifically mention Black Americans, and like you have mentioned about the Emmett Till bill and the lynchings, you have to have specific wording when it comes to policies. And it just, once again, going back to that pathology and the contaminated population, people are like, oh no, I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to put the B word. I'm not going to put the black word in there, right? So it's just like, once again, it's this, it's like we live in this insulated, isolated society in which, is once again like, oh, we're contaminated, and people get hyped up like, oh, they're the first black this, the first black that. That don't mean anything. No policies are going to be um for us, that's going to be advocated for us. And how many times do we need to have a bill that's being passed about studying reparation? All these freaking museums that I've been to that we have that shows records and records and records of the atrocities that was done on American soil. You need to have another bill to study it.
Well, when you look at the bill and the studies, right? And I definitely echo your frustration. And I'm quite sure anybody that believes in reparative justice is echoing your frustration. But that's the play. The play has always been a study. That's because that's basically what the Kerner Report was done. A study, you did a study 60 years ago, and nothing tangible came from that. And now you want to do another study when you're seeing the ramifications of it, and we got to continue harping on the point. You see the ramifications of chattel slavery. You see the ramifications of Jim Crow. You see the ramifications of redlining. You see, and now you're seeing the ramifications of descendants of all that housing discrimination. Descendants of all that, boom. Now is the remnants of mass incarceration with the crime bills. So today we're frustrated because we don't want no more studies. You've had enough studies. It's time to address the issue. We know the symptoms. We know how it needs to be a redistribution of wealth or distribution of equal resources to address basically what came out of the Kerner Report, the big statement, the indictment statement. we're on the brink and have been on the brink of two Americas, separate but equal, a white America and a black America. Now, people will say, well, a lot of black people today in 2025 are millionaires, but the wealth gap has continued to grow. And it will go to the point where, at a certain point in the very, very near future, where black people will have zero wealth.
Mhm.
We're not
And we're
talking about
talking about
individuals. We're talking about a class of people. Because I know a lot of times people feel like, well, I'm doing good. I got stocks. I got this. I'm doing well. I got some property. I'm well off. I'm doing better than I was raised on. Or I'm doing better. My kids don't have it better than I had. However, when you look at a group of people, and I know a lot of people will say, well, this country has always helped groups of people of ethnicity. This country has always helped that help a specific group, but they turned their back on Black America,
Mhm.
and it shows. You blame. You want to understand why incarceration got to where it is when you remove the black fathers from the home.
Right.
You know, you basically threw a nuclear bomb on the nuclear family,
Mhm.
destroyed it. So much so that when you do meet people that was born in a nuclear family household, that's like odd. Oh, you
Mhm.
have parents in your house? Really? And it has nothing to do with whether the father is taking care of his child or not. We're talking about in the home, under the same roof, together. There's so many studies on the outcome of those children if both parents are in that household. And that goes for white households, but particularly, but we're talking about the black family now, in
Right.
particular, these two ports.
Mhm. Exactly. So it's just I look at it as the Moynihan Report rather blame black folks than, like you have mentioned, redistributing resource. And it's like, it's going back to that black folks need to pull themselves up by the bootstrap. But of course, if you had a head start in anything and everything, how is that going to happen? In which, black people have to start at, I would say, negative. Yeah, we have periods in which, you know, we had a wealth. But like you have mentioned, like collectively, and just because you may be doing well as an individual in 2026, do you have enough wealth to transfer to? Because during the pandemic, white wealth was being transferred to millennials, to Gen Z, to Gen Alpha. And while we over here, there's so many of our people who never even own a home.
In the
Never
next 10 to
even
15 years, it's going to be the largest transfer of wealth in the history of our country.
exactly.
The boomers are dying, and the boomers from a specific class of people are leaving the next generation wealth. A lot of people from the black community are not being left generational wealth. And you hear it. You hear a lot of people saying they're going to create. You cannot create generational wealth on your own. I
No.
know it sounds good and it's cliche, and you'll hear these sports figures say, well, I'm creating generational wealth. Once again, like Drea said and explained, that's individual. It has
Mhm.
nothing to do with, it's not going to change the wealth gap. So
Exactly.
Sister Star put up a very interesting comment. She said, the plan is to keep us on a treadmill of nowhere.
Right.
And this is what we need to realize. Like, we've wasted Black America, for lack of better words, the last 60 years have been wasted on a bunch of broken promises, a bunch of nothing burgers, as they say. You know the symptoms, you know the system that created the symptoms, but no policy has ever been done about it. And this is where, when you think about it, with the Moynihan Report, it took accountability off of politicians, because we didn't require any any of them, any politician, to address our needs, to address Black America's needs.
Mhm. And like you
So
said, we didn't require. Go ahead.
I have somebody in the comments that and I welcome the comments. Long as you're respectful to yourself and to our audience, I'll always put your comment up. But hopefully, your comment is going to have something to do with what we're talking about. Don't just hear what we're talking about, but if you understand what we're talking about and in the context we're talking about it, I'll address your comments or Drea will address your comments, right? So this person said, how many generations, I guess, of Black people going to wait for someone else to pick them up till y'all realize ain't nobody going to do your homework? If you don't mind, and we'll address your comment, explain your ethnicity, who
Mhm.
you your family background a little bit. Don't get into specific, and then we'll address it. I think that question is very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I grew up in the New York metropolitan area. A lot of what I would consider and what you may consider white people that I grew up with, their families came through Ellis Island. Their family came through Ellis Island willingly. We all know what WAP stood for and who it uh, focused on when it focused on the Italian Americans at the time, the immigrants at the time. So I'm well aware of certain Italians. I'm well of our Irish brothers and sisters as well. So we're going to have this discussion because we can explain to you why you may think that your people pulled yourself up by the bootstrap, but the reality is that it didn't.
Mhm.
I know the difference between a Neapolitan Italian and a Sicilian and how Sicilians feel about Neapolitans. Professor Drea grew up in Boston, so she's well aware about the Irish and how most of the Irish were indigent servants.
Yes. And how a lot of them came to Boston because of the potato famine in their own country, and how when they did come to Boston, that too, they too, and you can do your due diligence and your research, were discriminated until it's this thing that's called whiteness that happened, right? Because even in South Boston, there's a generation of them, and guess what? Majority back in, I would say, old school Boston, majority of them was on either the police force or they had designated jobs as firemen.
So I see this brother, sister, whoever says, so what are you going to do about it? Well, the thing about it is, and what you should ask yourself, what you're going to do about
Mhm.
it. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that when we do talk about uh, race, ethnicity, Black Americans are Black Americans. They cannot assimilate the whiteness in America. You can be an Italian, like I said, who at one time in this country they were calling you a derogatory term. And throughout history, what has happened is you assimilated the whiteness. If you look it up, you will even see that some of the Asian community sued the United States government to be considered white at one time.
Mhm.
Irish Americans, like I said, and Drea explained, some of them won't say that they're Irish. They will have assimilated to whiteness. And when we say whiteness, we speak about whiteness as a privilege, not as a race. We talk about whiteness in this country being the majority. So when you come in this type of setting, this channel, I appreciate the questions, long as they're respectful to yourself into the channel, but know what you're talking about first.
Right.
Know the complexity because it is complex. Because you would think, damn, slavery, and I know what it is because I have white friends that I went to school with, and I know what they say sometimes. Oh, slavery was so long ago. Y'all ain't, slavery was this long ago. Do you understand about Jim Crow laws? Do you
Mm-hmm.
understand about redlining? Even if you live up north, and Drea will tell you, we're from up north. Our families are from the south, but we're from up north. You can Google the town you live in, and I can guarantee that the town you live in was having redlining in the 70s. You can Google white flight and understand what is white flight. So I'm not going to dispute or disrespect your comment or question, but don't think it is appears as that phrase "pick yourself up by the bootstrap," which was really a phrase for cowboys.
Mm-hmm.
How to use that phrase on a group of people that, like Moynihan, you're looking at the symptom
Right.
instead of the systems that created these symptoms.
And I want to address that comment because you always have people who say, "Well, so what's you going to do about it?" So that's a projection. So my thing is, we all have to have a sense of responsibility to ourselves, to our family, and to our community. And I think we forget that, and we got away from that. So what are you going to do about it versus just asking us?
As long as you're going to be a victim, nothing is going to change. How many black folks work hard in school, work hard to get a job, and work hard? I don't know how. I'm not going to disrespect you. I don't know how old you are. I tried to get you to explain who you are. Just tell us some background about yourself. But you are watching two black homeowners. Professor Drea comes from the academic field. I don't come from that. I had a couple years of college. So yes, you are correct in your way of thinking and saying, yeah, so, some black people that are doing well and doing well for themselves and being able to take care and provide for their family. But we're not talking about individualism. We're talking about if you Google the Kerner Report or you just put in the Moynihan Report. We're talking about two reports that happened in the 60s and how those systems and systems and symptoms are still and never have been addressed. So that's what we're talking about.
Hmm. And there's
He
no
said,
other race that have been having reports on them. And
he
how did
said
we do it?
so if you read the Moynihan Report, and I don't want to show the focus specifically on you, what was your thoughts on the Moynihan Report? Look at this. Look at this dragon. But anyway, I appreciate you watching. I'm glad you're here. You can feel any way you want to feel. Like I said, as long as you respect it to yourself, because you're
Hmm.
not disrespecting me or Dre. You're disrespecting yourself when you choose to be on the
Absolutely.
internet, acting like you acting. You want to be grown and have a conversation. Even if you disagree, we can agree to disagree. I'm not gonna block you, kick you out, and all that stuff. But I'll respectfully disagree with you. But when we had this conversation, let's be real here. So he said that he read the Moynihan report. Dre,
Hmm.
what was the correct name for the Moynihan report again?
The group, right?
The Negro report, right?
Report, yeah. And like I said, what other group had a report done on them? You know what I'm saying? It's like we specifically have some type of power for us to be studied and studied again, and we have two reports. And if you had done the due diligence, you would took some type of feedback or knowledge from it. Nothing's changed since 1962.
Well, I mean, I won't say nothing has changed since 1962, but when you look at, like we said, when you look at the symptoms, and this is why it's key that we understand the cons of the Moynihan Report, is he spoke about the symptoms. He spoke about the symptoms. We have to understand symptoms. You catch colds. You might be vitamin C deficient. That's why
Mm-hmm.
you catch a lot of colds all the time. Well, you may not wash your hands, or you may have a compromised immune system, whatever. That's talking about the symptoms. It's not talking about the system.
Mm-mm. Which is a
So
root problem.
the symptoms of why he felt as a department or second department secretary of labor, why this report got so much backlash. It got
Mm-hmm.
backlash from white and black America. It just wasn't black America upset with this report. It was a nothing burger from someone. If you look at it, he was the head of Department of Labor. So if he was the head of Department of Labor, what do you do? What do you create? What could you create that can change someone?
You create initiatives, and that's the thing. Go ahead, Reed.
Whitey makes the symptoms. We're not blaming white people. You're not understanding. You're not. See, you jumped in the chat and you're not understanding the purpose of the conversation. You're too busy trying to push back. You're protecting the system. When you say stuff like this, you're protecting the system. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need to protect the system. The system needs to be changed. This is what you're not getting. The system needs to be changed. Drea don't need the people that subscribe to this channel that have been supporting my channel. We don't need nobody to blame white people. It's not about blaming white people. It's the system.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people get offended. A lot of people that I know that are white that will get offended. Well, we don't owe you. We didn't own slaves. Slavery was legal. It's the system.
Right. And you benefited from that system, and you currently benefiting from the system as well. And see, system doesn't have a color to it or ethnicity to it. Welfare took the black man out the house.
Okay. Part of the problem was that women that part of the problem was that women, black, white, wanted the job programs for themselves. Interesting comment. One of the things that we discussed when we talked about even the Civil Rights Act, which came later, was it made white women, in particular, a double minority.
Mm-hmm.
White women are considered a double minority. White women are considered a double minority. White women was considered a double minority. White women are the greatest recipients of DEI programs.
Exactly.
And we're not talking about politics. We're talking about that's where the numbers are at. It's not a political show. White women are the number one assets for DEI.
Mm-hmm. And also, too, I want to piggyback off that comment. When wars was happening and men were being wiped out, when I'm talking about unalive, women had to replace them in the workplace, and you could definitely go look that up as well.
Oh, well, I'm gonna tell you, Tim, Drea, I could definitely speak for her when you say I'm poor white trailer trash. Where have I benefited? Um, you haven't benefited. You haven't benefited because it's a caste system within whiteness too.
Exact. I was just about to say that because another topic we could talk about is classism. We have a big, as Q said, caste system, but that's also classism in this country.
I know all the stereotypes, Tim Hobby. I know all the stereotypes that you get when you go look for a job. I know what the type of stuff that they say about you. So we're just talking about the system. We're talking about the systems and systems that's in place for you
Mhm.
that don't allow you to get ahead because people will look at you as T-rash.
Mhm.
So I'm quite sure you feel in this type of show be like, I came up here and I see two black people talk about the systems. I don't benefit from my whiteness as a privilege. The systems put you in the situation that you're in, whether you realize it.
Right. And remember, system does not discriminate. System does not mean a color. Is mainly you think about it, class. It doesn't mean ethnicity. It doesn't mean culture. It does not discriminate.
So, Drea, let me ask you before we close out for this week. We're gonna just keep discussing this for a couple weeks so we could really talk about it, and maybe the two gentlemen that's in the chat will join us next week too, because I do think they will give some good explanation from how they view it, whether we agree or disagree. Why do you think after the Moynihan Report and so many people got upset, white and black America, like why do you think so many people like pushback? Because the symptoms were there. Some of the symptoms were true. Whether we want to agree with them or not, some of them were true. Why do you think it was more pushback? You think it was more of, uh, as they would say, like reinforcing like Jim Crow stuff? 'Cause, a lot of people think Jim Crow laws were actually, well, Jim Crow rules or whatever was physical, and
Right.
they were just
It was
system
a system.
designed to yeah. We're going to use this word system. I'm be saying symptoms for a week. System, right? Um, when you look at it, it just reinforced because he knew as Department of Labor, he knew as a person that was even conducting this report, he knew the issues.
Mhm.
And then, as I say that word he used, a tangle of pathology. And we see that today. You see it where a lot of people will say, "Well, you got a victimhood of mentality. You're a victim. You victim." And you're getting a lot of pushback nowadays where everybody's saying, "Oh, if you say this, you're victimizing your situation." It happened.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
smack me in the face, and I say you smack me in the face, I'm a victim. Don't say I'm victim. I'm using victimhood. You smack me.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
what do you think that his agenda, his intent was?
I think his intent was to once again blame people instead of the system because people are lazy when it comes to digging down to that core issue and to the root issue. Number one. Number two, we gotta look at what was going on in 1965. So we still in the because I'm a history person, we still in the northern migration, and so I would say the pushback for Black folks. Hey, we done made it. We working in these auto industries. We working in these factories. I'm doing way better than I was in the South or whatever they was living at, right? So here goes the pushback. Like I'm not like my kin folks who still dealing with those issues in the southern regions, right? So that's another one. And like I mentioned, that ties into respectability politics. Now we live up north. kumbaya. We live in the Midwest. We don't have those issues up here. We live in freely, but not knowing once again is still a classism and a segregation even up north, and that could be a whole nother topic of discussion as well. So I think that's why it's a pushback, because now we live in this new, like we already heard about post racism, we live in this post racial America part one. I would say that's part one. We're not dealing with those issues like them folks in the South. But the person, the Moynihan, was from New York. So he obviously, it's like I got to place the blame somewhere, because nah, nah, nah. We still got to keep these people in this infrastructure underneath our thumb, because, let me drop this report.
I like some of the statements that's in the chat. I'm gonna put them on the screen now. Um, you guys will really be interested because me and Drea didn't explain something because this isn't that type of show. But you're gonna be shocked when you hear what we've got to say about some of these comments. What needs to change to change the systems to solve the problem? Oh, the systems need to change.
Yeah.
We believe in the political process. We believe that politicians should work for us, the people. Politicians nowadays, a lot of them, they dictate policy to the constituents instead of the constituents dictating policy to them. Uh, Robert Long said, "Plantation laws, democratic policies, and agenda." Um, Robert Long, I'm going to say to you, me and Drea both agree with you. We are independent, both of us.
Mhm.
Um, we would probably be more conservative in our views, conservative in our economic views. So, but we're politically we are both independent, and we both have our own personal gripes with the Democratic Party and what they've always been about. So we do push back on the Democratic Party. So we do understand um, that that aspect of what you're just saying. Um, the pushback wasn't black and white; it was liberal conservative. I won't say liberal conservative; it was liberals. But that's a whole nother discussion. Like we
It
didn't
really
want to
is.
turn it into a political show. We really wanted to have this discussion to talk about these two ports and understanding, like I said, with understanding where we're at with migration, with the immigration, and under the Hart-Celler Act, what and why we're in the condition we're in, and the influx of over 20 million people by President Biden, and what he has done by putting a restraint on every American. Whether people agree with the immigration policies that President Trump has or not, and how they're enforcing it, illegal immigration puts a strain on the people. So now he's giving us suggestions for books. He said, read Beyond Civil Rights by Daniel Geary, Losing Ground by Charles Murray. He cared deeply about the bad situation. You Monahan? I don't know about that. I don't know about that. Monahan was a very interesting character. I don't know if he cared about um, the situation for Black American. I think that Monahan looked at the symptoms and focused on the symptoms more than ever. President Johnson, when he got them to do the Kerner Report, he may have wanted to address why the situation was there was. He blamed systems, but he only addressed the Kerner Report only got addressed when the city started burning,
Mhm.
when there was so much unrest in the country.
Mhm.
Conservatives push back too. Yeah, we know conservatives push back. Any final thoughts for the night, Drea?
This was an interesting conversation, and I hope everyone who is commenting come back for part two. But in the meantime, you all's homework is to really look at the Moynihan Report. Do your due diligence. Like, we can come on here and talk our talk because we did our due diligence. So it's your turn to do your research and to see what have really pivoted and changed for Black folks and for your own condition too. Because people like to say, "Oh, what have you have done?" But look at it and realize, like we mentioned on here, we still in one America, but we got so many different slices of the pie here. That once again is so many layers of what you see is manifested in 2026. So that's my piece is everyone go do your research and you just don't rush through the report. If you don't understand something, look it up and come back next week with questions.
Yeah, we definitely gonna probably come back next week. I know before Drea and myself would do a show every other week, but next
Every
week,
other
next
week.
Wednesday, you guys don't come on the channel on a Tuesday or a Monday or whatever day you may see me do it and discuss this. This will be discussed next Wednesday,
Mhm.
hopefully. If
Or the week
if that,
after. Sorry.
yeah, that's usually on me. We'll be back next week. We could. It'll be on me if we don't have a show next week. I'll be running into situations that I have no control over. Uh, One of the things that I asked, and I'm glad that with Poster 9296 and a couple other people in the chat, I'm glad you guys could join us because once we take the emotion out, once we take the blame game out of it, we'll see. You're right. I better be here, right? You'll see how, um, if you look at the present situation, you will see how because these systems have never been addressed, most people think that it's going to be a race war. It's not. It's not by accident.
Mhm.
It's not by accident that we're being pitted against each other. It's not. It's not by accident. It's not by accident that some people have very interesting views towards immigration. It's not by accident. Some people um, have gotten politicians have gotten away with not addressing the system. Politicians have got away with not addressing the system that they created. Because
Mhm.
you or I didn't create this. In spite of your situation, in spite of some of the good and bad decisions that you have made in life, you did not create this system. The people that created a system where it should be checks and balances correctly. It should be a system where, if you believe in the Constitution, where even with the amendments, where everybody is created equal and everybody starts off on a level playing field, you would think that that's true if you believe in that. And if you believe in that, I hope you do believe in that because that is the American Constitution. However, you'll see that it was some systems in place then and now that really will put you behind the eight ball. So I'm not here to lecture nobody. I'm here to have a conversation, here to do what I do for our channel. Like I said, tune in next week, man. And, you know, as we like to say, like it who like it, don't like it who don't like it. We'll see you guys next week. Take
Yeah.
care. Remember, the best way to support the channel is to like, share, subscribe. On behalf of Sister Drea, Professor Drea, and myself, take care. Have a great week.
Peace, everyone.